I'm VJ Hamilton and welcome to the Autoimmune Reset, the place for you to learn how to thrive with autoimmune disease and feel empowered to take steps to transform your health to feel better than ever. You can start making changes today to improve your health. So with every episode, my mission is to share with you simple ways to up-level your diet and lifestyle with key learnings from my own journey reversing autoimmune disease and inspirational stories from those who have reset their autoimmune symptoms and are now thriving in life. I suffered from autoimmune disease for over 25 years and now I live symptom-free, and I wish the same for you as well. So thank you for being here and sharing this time with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Autoimmune Reset podcast. I'm your host, VJ Hamilton. I'm a nutritionist, scientist and expert in autoimmune disease. And today I'm going to be discussing 5 effective ways to alleviate food sensitivities. Because when I'm working with people who have autoimmune disease or inflammatory conditions, one of the concerns and the frustrations that they come to me with is that they have many food sensitivities and they find that they are reacting to more and more foods, not just ultra-processed foods or the obvious culprits like gluten and dairy, but they just find that they will eat a meal and they are reacting to it and they have no idea why. And there are some techniques that you can use to help to alleviate food sensitivities, because when it comes to a food sensitivity, and I like to call them food reactions or food reactivity, because there are different types of reactions that you can have from food. I will go into the difference in a moment between a food sensitivity, a food intolerance and a food allergy. But the truth is, when you're reacting to lots of foods, it's to do with imbalances in your gut, imbalances in your immune system. And for some people, if you are genetically susceptible to that reactivity to that food, for example, with celiac disease, then it may be the case that that food in particular is causing a reaction. But what I often find is when my clients are reacting to lots of different foods, we can improve their tolerance to the foods that they're reacting to, which means that they can start to include more foods in their diet. And when it comes to my own health, I used to react to everything. About 10 years ago and, throughout my 20s and early 30s, I would just react to lots of different foods and it would change. I even had to have a day off work because I had such a bad reaction to quinoa when I was in my mid-20s, and I felt like I had the flu. I had extreme pain in my stomach, and that was just from quinoa. And then I would get food reactions to lots of different foods, and I've tried lots of different techniques to determine what my food reactions are. And in the most recent food sensitivity test that I have done, I had one food reaction. And when I did that test 10 years ago, it probably came up with 30 reactions because it was showing that my gut was imbalanced. And that's absolutely key here. So I wanted to talk to you about some ways that you can help to improve your tolerance to foods. And it might be that testing or doing certain elimination protocols or working with a nutritionist is going to be the best thing for you to do if you are having lots of food reactions. But you can take these simple steps to identify what might be the issue and also ways that you can improve your gut health and your immune health so that you're not reacting to so many foods. But let's first understand what a food sensitivity is, because a food sensitivity is when you're having an immune response to a food, and it is driven by an antibody which is referred to as an IgG antibody. And with these types of reactions, you don't always get an immediate reaction. But when I'm working with clients, I'm also testing for food allergies a lot of the time now, because the test that I ordinarily use now is a test that tests for both IgG and IgE, because I find that clients will be having reactions to different foods and they will be having these different reactions, which again is why I like to categorize it as reactions. But when it comes to an allergy, that is a more immediate response, and it is often a more severe response to a food. And again, it is immune driven, but it's driven by an antibody, which is referred to as an IgE antibody. And this is where we will normally have an issue with histamines, and we're more likely to have hives, and it can be extremely severe, and you can have anaphylaxis. So this is something that you need to be aware of if you do have this type of reaction, and be very cautious about it. And then there is also a food intolerance, and a food intolerance is when you are not digesting foods appropriately. And that can be because you are not producing enough of the enzyme that helps break down that food. For example, with a lactose intolerance, it's that you're not producing enough lactase, for the most part anyway. And there are certain people who have certain genetic susceptibilities that won't be producing as much lactase as the next person, and you can actually test for this as well. But if that is the case, it means that your body is not digesting the lactose in milk efficiently, and that can create issues in the gut as much as any food sensitivity or food allergy would, but it's not as immune driven as a food sensitivity or food allergy. And that's why, to keep it simple, I keep it as a food reaction, because there are many factors to this, and as much as they are driven by different antibodies and different reasons for you having the symptoms, there are things that you can do which can help to address a lot of these different reactions. But as I said, you need to be particularly careful with a food allergy, and that is something that I'm not going to be covering today, but it is something that I will look for and test for. And by stabilizing your gut, by stabilizing your immune health, that can also help with allergies. But I always like to be cautious when it comes to things like allergies because of the severe response that you can have from them. So you do need to be extremely careful. So I'm just going to be talking predominantly about food sensitivities today, but it's just worth knowing that there are these other food reactions when it comes to your symptoms after eating. So how do you identify if you have a food sensitivity? I'm sure if you have had symptoms after eating a meal, you suspect that you have a food sensitivity, but it's not always clear what food you reacted to, because normally when we're eating a meal, it's not just one food. And that's why keeping a food and symptom journal can be extremely helpful. Even if you wake up in the morning with a slight headache, I would be thinking about what I ate the night before, or even what I ate for lunch. And sometimes if I have, for example, feta cheese for lunch, and I know that I have an intolerance to milk, even though I don't have a food allergy, I am pretty sure I have an intolerance to it in some way. And when I have something like feta cheese, I can tolerate it more now, but I may wake up the next day with just a little bit of a foggy head, and I will just look back and think, oh yeah, I had some feta cheese for lunch that day. And when I was going through this myself, and when I was having lots of different food reactions, I was much more disciplined with keeping a food diary, because that just gave me so much insight about the foods that were causing a reaction. And there are some other ways that we can do that as well. But it's just worth knowing that a food sensitivity reaction isn't always what you think, because you can have bloating, you may have gas, and they might be symptoms that are more obvious to you, but you can also have symptoms like fatigue and brain fog and skin issues like eczema, joint pain, headaches, and even mood changes. And one of the things that I identified in myself by tracking my symptoms was that every time I ate gluten, I would get anxiety. I would actually my mood would change significantly. And at a later point, I was having panic attacks after having gluten, and that's why I stopped having gluten. It wasn't to do with any digestive symptoms. It was to do with the fact that I noticed that every time that I ate gluten, I was having this reaction to it, and it was affecting my brain, whereas for some people it affects their gut. For me, it was affecting my brain, and that's when I just thought, no, I won't be having gluten again. That was enough for me to make that decision. Some people like to do the testing, and I have done IgG testing, and gluten hasn't come up, but I haven't eaten gluten for a very long time, and that could be the reason that it's not come up as well. So just so you know, that a food sensitivity, when it comes to symptoms, it isn't always going to show up in your gut and in your digestive health. There could be other symptoms that relate to it, and that's why it is always worth tracking your symptoms. So let's talk about these 5 effective ways to help to alleviate a food sensitivity. And the first tip that I have for you is to support your gut barrier with butyrate-rich foods, and that includes stewed apples. Our gut bacteria help us digest food, and they also keep the immune system in check when it comes to the food that we're eating, and also when it comes to the response that we're having to the food that we're eating. And more research is showing that butyrate, which is produced by your gut bacteria, they are short chain fatty acids that are produced by your gut bacteria. They help to energize the colon, but on top of that, they help to keep your immune system tolerant, and they help to make sure that it is not reacting to these foods. And that's not just in the gut, but they have shown that that can happen in the blood and systemically in the body as well. So we need to make sure that we're feeding our gut bacteria with the right food that help it produce butyrate, because we can have a healthy gut microbiome, but if we're not feeding it the right food, then we're not going to produce short chain fatty acids. And sometimes when I'm working with clients, I'll find that they have a high abundance of gut bacteria, but they have a very low amount of short chain fatty acids. And that gives me an indication that they're not eating the right foods to help to get the most benefit from the gut bacteria they have in order to produce butyrate. And there are direct sources of butyrate as well. You can find butyrate in butter and ghee. So if you're not on a dairy-free diet, then that is a good way to include it in your diet as well. And you can also find some supplements that will have butyrate in it, a direct source of butyrate. So if you find on a stool test that your butyrate levels are very low, then it might be worth supplementing in the short term while you work on your gut microbiome and feed it the right foods to produce butyrate for you. But a really easy thing that you can do to produce butyrate production is to start including resistant starch in your diet. And stewed apples are a really great choice for this, because when you cook apples slowly, they release pectin, which is a fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria, and they help your gut bacteria produce butyrate. So to make stewed apples, all you need to do is chop up some apples, put them in a pan, add some water to the pan, just cover the apples, and then you can boil that up. It will take about 5 to 10 minutes, and then just mash that down, making sure that you have the skin on, because that's where you will get most of the pectin. And then you can just add some cinnamon to that, and you can add that to your breakfast in the morning. And that is going to provide the fiber that helps to feed your gut bacteria and produce short chain fatty acids. So that is a really good thing to start including in your diet. And any resistant starch is going to help to feed your gut bacteria to produce these short chain fatty acids. Another very simple way to increase resistant starch in your diet is to eat cold potatoes, bizarrely. So they found that when you boil some potatoes with the skin on, new potatoes are a really good potato to use, and then let those cool down. And that is a really great source of soluble fiber as well. And so just adding that, as long as you're okay with potatoes, just adding that a couple of times a week, as well as having the stewed apples, is going to give you that insoluble fiber that is going to help to feed the gut bacteria, and that is going to help to produce short chain fatty acids and help to lower your food sensitivities, because that is going to help with immune tolerance. The next tip I have for you is to increase your secretory IgA with vitamin A rich foods. So we have an antibody in the gut that is referred to as secretory IgA. And what can happen is you can either have a very high amount of secretory IgA or have a very low amount of secretory IgA, especially when your immune system is suppressed. And we want a healthy amount of secretory IgA in our immune system, and we want it to be working optimally. So as much as this helps to increase secretory IgA, it also helps to modulate the immune response, which is what we're looking for when it comes to a food sensitivity. Secretory IgA needs vitamin A rich foods in order for your body to have the right nutrients to produce it. And just think of secretory IgA as the antibody that lines your gut and other mucosal surfaces. So it's also very important for conditions like Sjogren's or conditions where the mucosal barrier is impacted, anything in the mouth or in the eyes. You need to make sure that you are getting enough vitamin A, because when secretory IgA levels are low, you are far more vulnerable to food sensitivities and infections. I know a lot of people, when they have an autoimmune disease, think about their immune response being really fired up. And for some people that is the case, but for other people it is that their immune system is suppressed, which means they're more prone to infections. It means that their barrier function, including their gut barrier, becomes compromised. And that's why we need to make sure that we've got the right nutrients in the diet to help with our gut barrier function, but also to help with our secretory IgA production. And that's why vitamin A rich foods can really help. Vitamin A is not one thing. There is beta carotene that we find in mainly plant-based foods and is more of an antioxidant. But when beta carotene is converted in the body to retinol, which is the more active form of vitamin A, then that is the form that our body uses for these types of processes. So if you are eating a lot of plant-based foods rich in beta carotene and you don't have an issue converting beta carotene to retinol, then you might be okay. But they have shown that a large percentage of people have an issue with that conversion, and that means you need to be getting vitamin A from other sources. You can get it from cod liver oil and egg yolks and liver, and these are all really excellent sources of vitamin A. So making sure that you are having those in the diet is important. And if you're having something like cod liver oil, that's also a great supplement because it includes vitamin D as well and your omega-3 fatty acids. And that brings me on to my next tip, which is around omega-3 fatty acids, because omega-3 fatty acids really help to keep inflammation in control and ensure that our body is more in an anti-inflammatory state rather than a pro-inflammatory state. And you may have heard me explain this before, but it's not just to do with the amount of omega-3s in your diet, it's to do with the amount of omega-3s in your diet versus omega-6s, because omega-3s help to promote an anti-inflammatory response in the body, whereas omega-6s have more of a pro-inflammatory response in your body. And when that balance is tipped towards a more pro-inflammatory response, it means that you're far more likely to be reactive to food. So just addressing this alone can make a huge difference. And there are lots of tests on the market now, and I offer this testing as well, which will look into your omega-3 index and gives you a good indication of whether your body is more in that pro-inflammatory state rather than that anti-inflammatory state. And another tip around this is that there is a beneficial fat that you find in evening primrose oil called GLA, and that is anti-inflammatory in nature and has lots of benefits, but it is an omega-6 fat. So you might think, well, why would you take that if omega-6s are pro-inflammatory? And the thing with GLA is that as long as you take it with omega-3s, then it is more likely to be anti-inflammatory in the body. So if you are taking evening primrose oil, it's very important for you to be taking omega-3s to ensure that you are getting the anti-inflammatory benefit of that GLA rather than it becoming inflammatory for you. Now, omega-3s are found in oily fish like salmon, mackerel and sardines, but also in walnuts, flaxseed and chia seed. That is a slightly different type of omega-3, which is referred to as alpha-linolenic acid. And you need that as well, but where you're going to get the most anti-inflammatory response is when you're producing DHA and EPA, which are the types of omega-3s which are found in oily fish. So aiming for at least, I would say, 2 to 3 servings of oily fish a week, and potentially considering a fish oil supplement is going to be helpful. But you might want to find out what your baseline is first. And when it comes to omega-3s, always work with a health practitioner if you are thinking about supplementing, because there are some contraindications with certain conditions and medications. The next tip I have for you is about practicing mindful eating and supporting protein breakdown, because when it comes to proteins in particular, they are the things that activate that immune response. So if you don't break down your food properly and break down proteins properly, no matter what the food, then you are more likely to get a reaction. And this might be the reason that some people get reactions to lots of different foods, and they really can't pinpoint which food they're reacting to because there just seems to be so many. And it might be that you're reacting to the protein in the food because it hasn't been broken down properly, because protein is reliant on the gastric juices you produce, it's reliant on stomach acid. And that's why practicing mindful eating is particularly important for protein breakdown as well, because that helps to stimulate the release of those juices. And if that isn't happening, then you're far less likely to be breaking down protein. And when you're eating in a rushed or distracted state, your digestive system is not going to be fully engaged, and that can lead to that incomplete digestion, which is particularly important for proteins. It is also important for fats, but I think when it comes to food sensitivities, proteins are the ones to focus on. And as I said, when they're, these larger fragments are the things that are going to affect your gut lining. If you have leaky gut syndrome, the larger fragments of the proteins are going to go into the bloodstream, and that could fire up an inflammatory response as well, which is why we get these other symptoms like fatigue and headaches and skin rashes and joint pain. So we need to make sure that we are supporting proper digestion, and that starts in the stomach. So ensuring that you have adequate stomach acid levels is absolutely key. There are a couple of ways that you can look into your stomach acid levels, and there is a test that I will recommend my clients to do, which is certainly not a diagnostic test, but it's going to give you an idea of what level your stomach acid is at currently. Because without enough stomach acid, your body can't effectively break down proteins, which may explain some symptoms like bloating or indigestion or just feeling really heavy after a meal. So if this sounds familiar, then I would recommend doing this test at home, because all you have to do is mix about 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda in a small glass of water, drink it first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, and see how long it takes you to burp. And if it takes you longer than 3 minutes, then it could suggest that you have low stomach acid. And as I said, this is not a definite diagnosis, but it just gives you that helpful indicator that there might be an issue. Now, if the test indicates low stomach acid, it's worth looking into that and exploring why your stomach acid is low. Is it to do with the fact that you are constantly eating in a rushed state? Are you stressed? I mean, these are some of the more obvious ones, but it could be to do with certain nutrient deficiencies, because a zinc deficiency could be a factor when it comes to low stomach acid, because you need zinc for your stomach acid. And there is a zinc taste test that you can do. You just buy some zinc solution and see whether you can taste it or not. And that gives you an indication of a zinc deficiency. And there are some other indications like white lines on your nails that might indicate a zinc deficiency. Zinc is important for the immune system. So getting frequent illnesses and colds might be a sign of a zinc deficiency. But you can also test for that as well to understand whether that is a factor for you. But if you do find that your stomach acid is low and you're looking for ways to increase it, then you can add a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar to a glass of water before meals. Just always be mindful with apple cider vinegar that it can be corrosive to your teeth enamel, which is vital for your health. So using a straw can be helpful. You can also use digestive bitters to help stimulate stomach acid. I mean, that's the way I prefer to do it. and that can help to stimulate other gastric juices as well, which can help with fat digestion. And I also drink an artichoke leaf tea before a meal. I mean, that's predominantly around fat digestion when it comes to bitters, but it just can help with the whole digestive process. But mindful eating is absolutely essential too. I work with many clients who have low stomach acid, and we look at some ways to increase it with different strategies of what they're going to do before meals and eat before meals, and taking certain supplements as well that can help with it. But then when we go down to the basics, they're not sitting down and eating in a rested state, and that can have such a massive impact. And just thinking about the amount of time you're actually chewing your food. Are you chewing each bite of food 30 times? If not, that could significantly help in the digestion of the food that you're eating. And if you're not doing that, that's certainly the first place to start rather than doing anything more complicated. But by ensuring proteins are fully digested, that can help to prevent these larger undigested fragments from irritating your gut lining and triggering that food sensitivity. So this step can really help if you're having lots of different food reactions and you're not sure why. It might be to do with your digestive process rather than a food sensitivity itself. And once you start breaking down foods properly and digesting foods properly, you may find that your tolerance to foods increases. And then lastly, there are various techniques that you can use to help to gradually reintroduce foods to then desensitize your body to these foods. And I have done this myself. And ordinarily you do this through doing an elimination protocol. You can do testing first to find out what foods you're reacting to, because that's going to give you a more personalized approach to this. And there are certain elimination protocols which take out the main foods that people react to ordinarily. But when I have done this, I have done testing, and I offer food sensitivity testing at the Autoimmunity Nutritionist Clinic. So I'll put the link to that in the show notes if you want to look into that. When it comes to an elimination protocol, you would take out those foods that you find that you are reacting to. For example, you might have done that food journaling and found that you keep reacting to chili. So you take chili out of your diet for 4 to 6 weeks. You allow your gut and immune system to have a break, and then you reintroduce them slowly and see if you have any reactions. And obviously with a food sensitivity, sometimes you don't get the reaction straight away. So just be mindful of any reaction that you have over a 1 to 3 day period, and even over the week. It is just worth tracking those foods. You can either follow a set elimination protocol, and I would recommend doing that with a health practitioner. I work with some clients where we are not sure what foods that they are reacting to, and we will use the elimination protocol, and that will exclude foods like gluten and dairy and soy and eggs and nightshades and some processed foods which are more likely for them to be reacting to. And then if my clients have done a food sensitivity test, we will just take out the foods that have been identified in that test, take that out to 4 to 6 weeks, and then reintroduce them slowly. As with any restrictive type diet, you need to make sure that that is the right thing for you. If you have had disordered eating in the past, or you are working on your relationship with food, this probably isn't the right thing for you. I make sure that I go through that with my clients, and we do everything we possibly can to include as much food as possible in their diet, because I think that is extremely important for your gut microbiome. And I think the gut microbiome is one of the most fundamental aspects of your health. But if it makes sense to exclude that food and then reintroduce it slowly, then that's the way I'm going to go, because I'm just hoping to help my clients as much as possible with their symptoms. And I'm gluten free. I've managed to bring in most other foods into my diet, most of the healthy foods anyway. That's how I manage my food reactions. I make sure that I'm on a daily basis eating foods that are gut nourishing and reduce any food sensitivities that I have and increase my tolerance to foods. And that's where I would like to get my clients to as well. So in summary, the 5 strategies we've discussed today to help to alleviate food sensitivities is to support your gut barrier function with butyrate-rich foods, boost secretory IgA with vitamin A, include omega-3 acids to help to lower the inflammatory response, support protein digestion with mindful eating, and lastly, use a gradual reintroduction of foods by using an elimination protocol to help to desensitize your immune system to those foods so that you have more tolerance to them. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to pop over to my Instagram account. You can ask me any questions over there, or you can join my free group, which is the Autoimmune Forum. It's a community of individuals with chronic illness and autoimmune disease and inflammatory conditions, and I'm sharing lots of tips over there. It's a great community with members sharing their experience of living with these conditions, and I would love to see you over there. If not, have a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll be in touch soon. Take care. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Autoimmune Reset. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you liked it, I would hugely appreciate a review on iTunes, as it helps me understand what you like about the podcast and to help share the information with more people. I'm excited to speak to you next time, and remember, you have the power to take the reins on your health. So keep the faith and celebrate the small wins. Until next time.